Hello guys, welcome to the second video of the CSS Animation bite-sized tutorial, and in this video we're going to be looking at the transform property in CSS. Alright guys, so we're inside VS Code and we're inside a folder called CSS Animation, which has two files of index.html and style.css, as well as having an image folder which has our little submarine image, which you can see here in the browser. Now inside the body you can see we've got a heading, and then we've also got a div with a class of submarine which has that image inside of it. Now if we go to the style sheet, I'm going to go inside the class of submarine, and in regards to the transform property, it's pretty self-explanatory. Any element we apply the property on will be transformed to that specific method and value we set, and we can visually manipulate an element by using either the methods of skew, rotate, translate or scale, which we'll be going over in this video. And finally we have both 2D and 3D transform method types. So let's first take a look at 2D. So the first one we're going to be looking at in here is, let's say, transform, and we're going to look at scale. Now the scale method, as you probably guessed, this affects the size of the element. So say we wanted to increase the size of our image here on the x-axis, we're just going to put a scale x and we're going to say 2. And what will happen now is the image will increase double the size on the x-axis, and then the same applies for the y-axis. So the image now is double the size on the y-axis. But as you can see, when we apply the value of 2 on either the x or y, the image looks a bit stretched and it just doesn't really look that good. So if we want to apply it to both the x and the y, we just take away the y-axis and the shorthand is just scale. And you can see now the value of 2 has been applied both to the x and the y, and the image looks a lot better. Now if I take the 2 value here and I change it to 1, you'll see the image revert back to its original size. That's because it's already at 1. If I say 0.5, it will be half the size of 1, so half the size on the x and the y. So it looks a lot smaller than the original now, or it's half the size of the original. Now this doesn't just apply to images, this also applies to font size, padding, height, and any width of an element too. Now the next one we're going to be looking at is skew. So I'm just going to take away scale here and say skew. Now skew basically just tilts the element either to the right or to the left, and this is dictated by a degree value. So let's just say we want it to tilt on the x-axis, we say skew x, and we'll say 25 degrees. And you'll see it will skew 25 degrees on the x-axis, and the same applies for the y-axis. So you'll see now it skewed 25 degrees on the y-axis, and you can also use negatives in here so it skews the other side. Now skew, like scale, has a shorthand, but it works a little bit differently. So if I take away skew right now, the only thing that's going to be skewed is the x-axis. We need to put 2 values in here. So the first value is of course the x-axis. The second value will be the y-axis, so let's just say 30 degrees. And now it's both skewed on the x and the y. If we don't have this value here, it's just going to skew on the x. So that's how the skew value works. Now let's say I wanted to move the element from its original position. We'd now use translate. So I'm going to say in here, translate. And let's first translate on the x-axis. So I want it to be 100 pixels to the right. So we just put in here 100 pixels. And now on the x-axis, it will move 100 pixels to the right. If we want to move it to the left, we'll use negatives. So now it's 100 pixels to the left. And then the same things apply to the y-axis. So it'll be 100 pixels up because it's negative. And then if we want to put it down, 100 pixels down. Now again, this also has a shorthand and it works the exact same way as skew. So if we just say translate and leave one value in here, it will only translate on the x-axis. If we want it to translate on the y-axis too, let's say push it 100 pixels down. It will go 100 pixels to the right and then 100 pixels down. So that's how the shorthand of translate works. Now in fact we're going to apply all of these methods in one line. So let's say we'll keep it at translate 100 pixels on the x and y, but let's say the scale, I want this to be 2, so it grows double the size. You can see now the image is translated 100 pixels on the x and the y. Now it's also doubled in size because of scale. And then let's also skew it. So we're just going to say skew 25 degrees on the x and 25 degrees on the y. So now we've used all the methods we've just learned in one line. So we've translated it 100 pixels on the x, 100 pixels on the y. We've scaled it in size, so it's double the size on the x and y. And we've also skewed it 25 degrees on the x and 25 degrees on the y. So that's how we can apply the methods all in one line. Now in regards to 3D, translate and scale both have 3D dimensions, but the one you'll most likely use for 3D purposes is likely to be rotate. Now rotate, like the previous methods, has both 2D and 3D, but let's first take a look at the 2D. So what I'm going to do is just get rid of these methods here, and we're just going to say rotate. And for 2D purposes, it's just this rotate method here, no x or y axes. And it also takes a degree value in here, so let's rotate it 45 degrees. And if we put in a positive number here, it will rotate clockwise. If we put in a negative number, it will rotate anti-clockwise. Now for 3D methods, you won't actually be able to see the 3D effect, but they are in fact rotating. Now to help us visually see this, I'm just going to comment this out and I'm going to apply this to a hover effect. So we're going to do submarine and we're going to say hover and we're going to say transform. And then we're first going to look at rotate X, so it's rotating on the X axis, and let's just say 45 degrees for this value here too. Now try and picture this as like a skewer on a barbecue that rotates. So we've got a line here, and when we get to the image, you'll see it'll rotate 45 degrees on the X axis. So again, trying to picture it like a skewer. So a skewer pole going across the image here, and it's rotating when we hover over it 45 degrees on the X axis. And again, the same would apply for the Y axis. So if I hover over this, try to picture a skewer across the middle of the image going vertically, and if I hover over this, you'll see it will turn 45 degrees on the Y axis. Now we've also got a Z axis, so we're just going to say 45 degrees on the Z axis. Now the Z axis points outwards from your screen, so it's basically giving you a 3D dimension. So try and picture the point being in the middle of the image, and when we hover over this, it will turn clockwise, and if we want it to turn anti-clockwise, we use negatives. So it's kind of similar to rotate, but it's a more 3D dimension because the Z axis is pointing outwards. And those are the methods for the transform property, guys. A really powerful property, and when coupled with the transition property, which we'll be looking at in the next video, you can create some really cool animations. But that'll be it for this video, guys. If you did like the content, please show your support by hitting the like button, and please consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video.